As years have gone by with no additional input from George R. R. Martin himself, fans have gotten very creative in theorizing about Jon Snow or Daenerys being the prophesied savior. Some are even claiming that supporting characters like the Hound Davos or even Gendry are Azor Ahai. But if this theory that I'm going to introduce you with in this video is true, then the prince has already come and gone and nobody even noticed. According to this theory, Jon Snow may not be Azor Ahai, although he might still have a connection to the prophesied savior of Westeros. There's a popular theory claiming that Azor Ahai was actually Rhaegar Targaryen, whom fans have often heard of and finally saw in Season 7. I'm sure you're wondering, doesn't the prince that was promised have to be alive? How will he defeat the Night King if he's dead? Well, according to this theory, he'll defeat the Night King the same way the original Azor Ahai did with his fabled weapon Lightbringer. Except in this case, Lightbringer is not a sword but rather a person named Jon Snow. In his youth, Rhaegar Targaryen himself actually believed that he was the prophesied prince, and so did his great-great-uncle Maester Aemon, before they both become convinced that the savior was actually Rhaegar's son Aegon instead. Rhaegar, I thought. The smoke was from the fire that devoured Summerhall on the day of his birth, the salt from the tears shed for those who died. He shared my belief when he was young, but later he became persuaded that it was his own son who fulfilled the prophecy, for a comet had been seen above King's Landing on the night Aegon was conceived, and Rhaegar was certain the bleeding star had to be a comet. What fools we were, we thought ourselves so wise, said Maester Aemon in A Feast for Crows. In case you don't know, Rhaegar was born at the Targaryen summer place Summerhall. Shortly after Rhaegar's birth, the palace was consumed by a great fire, which claimed the lives of King Aegon V, Maester Aemon's brother, the king's son and heir, and the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. The tragedy is one of the more intriguing backstories in Song of Ice and Fire given its unexplained nature. Perhaps Martin has been withholding details until a timely twist that reveals how the tragedy of Summerhall helps fulfill the prophecy of Azor Ahai, namely that Dany's older brother was literally born amid salt and smoke. As we all know, Azor Ahai is said to be born amid smoke and salt, and as Maester Aemon said, Rhaegar Targaryen does fulfill the prophecy. He was born in Summerhall on the very same day the castle burned to the ground. So there's the smoke, but what about the salt? That day the kingdom also had lost the current king at the time, a prince and the captain of the Kingsguard. As Maester Aemon pointed out, those deaths did lead to many tears, and tears are salty. However, the fact that Rhaegar became convinced his son was a prophesied prince may not be far off either. The man had her brother's hair, but he was taller, and his eyes were dark indigo rather than lilac. Aegon, he said to a woman nursing a newborn babe in a great wooden bed. What better name for a king? Will you make a song for him? The woman asked. He has a song, the man replied. He's the prince that was promised, and this is a song of ice and fire. Dany's vision of past in a clash of kings. Of course, fans know that the baby Rhaegar was talking about Aegon's life ended during the sack of King's Landing, when the Mountain smashed his head against the wall, killed his sister Rhaenys, and raped their mother Aelia Martell before killing her as well. As Game of Thrones taught us, the prophecies can be tricky, and while Rhaegar had the basics right, he was off in two key ways. He considered the wrong son to be the prophesied prince, and the right son is not actually the prince but rather the weapon. Ironically, it turns out that he was right the first time, he himself was Azor Ahai all along. According to a legend, Azor Ahai had to try it 3 times before successfully forging his flaming sword, Lightbringer. On the 3rd attempt, he realized he would have to sacrifice the thing he loved the most in his world. The successful creation of the weapon resulted with the death of his beloved wife, Nissa Nissa, who was said to cry out in both anguish and ecstasy when Azor Ahai tempered the blade by driving into her heart. Similarly, Jon Snow was Rhaegar's 3rd child, and his creation resulted with the death of Rhaegar's beloved wife, Lyanna Stark, who could be heard by her brother Eddard crying out in anguish and ecstasy from inside the Tower of Joy as she was giving birth to her son. So to summarize, Rhaegar was born amid smoke and salt. He forged his ultimate weapon on his 3rd attempt when he sacrificed his wife, and Jon has since become a literal sword of fire. Most assume that part about Lightbringer means that the original Azor Ahai killed his lover with an actual sword, and the sacrifice then imbued the sword with enough magical power that it could drive back the darkness. Here Azor Ahai kills his lover with his other sword. By wielding the power of that sword, Rhaegar ultimately created a new weapon forged with a loving wife's heart. The end product is a super weapon capable of destroying the Night King for good. Instead of a magical flaming sword, this weapon is Jon himself. There are clues hidden throughout the show about the true nature of Lightbringer's forging. George R. R. Martin uses the image of a man stabbing a woman with his sword as a metaphor for an intimate relationship elsewhere in the books. Perhaps the most prominent example would be a conversation between Theon and Barbie Dustin in A Dance with Dragons. Brandon loved his sword. He loved to hone it. "I've won it sharp enough to shave the hair from woman's cunt," he used to say, and how he loved to use it. "A blooded sword is a beautiful thing," he told me once. Long story short, it turns out that while fans have been eagerly awaiting the revelation of Westeros' savior, the man's time has come and gone. Rhaegar did not stab Lyanna through the heart because he interpreted the Azor Ahai prophecy correctly. The forging of Lightbringer is referring to the conceiving and birthing of a child. Rhaegar fulfilled his destiny when he created the sword in darkness Lightbringer Jon Snow. After all, this show is literally the Song of Ice and Fire, the melody that Rhaegar composed when he created his son, who would go on to become the weapon that will kill the Night King and save all Westeros from the Long Night. Now that I introduced you with this interesting theory, let me also introduce you with some exciting Season 8 news. I do have to warn you that these news include some spoilers for the upcoming season, so if you don't want anything spoiled, it's time for you to close this video. Anyways, Season 8 just finished filming the longest battle shoot in Game of Thrones history. Battles do take a long time since they are difficult to film. The greatest ones yet, the Battle of the Bastards and the Loot Train Ambush, each took about 1 month of production time. The upcoming Winterfell battle scene, on the other hand, required shoots at multiple locations that lasted for about or twice that long. It's also important to say that the end product is for a single episode, which means that this is something that's never been done before in the history of television. Shooting for this largest battle sequence in Game of Thrones has finally come to a close after 55 consecutive nights. The producer types shared a thank you message with all the cast and crew members who had worked on the sequence, including longtime assistant director Jonathan. 55 consecutive nights, 3 locations. You'll never again see anything like it. This battle, Winterfell, will be the biggest, most expensive action scene we've ever seen on TV. Another news is that Danish dragons or even the Night King's dragon will face new threat in Season 8. In Game of Thrones, dragons have always been a threat to others, and not so much the other way around, but Season 7 proved to be exception to the rule. First, Bran wounded Drogon with Qyburn's Scorpion, and then the Night King killed Viserion with an Ice Spear. In Season 8, dragons will face Qyburn's latest innovation and anti-dragon warfare. Qyburn seemingly decided to improve his original design by following the common saying of the bigger the better. Besides being much bigger, the new Scorpion also has a new design, with 2 additional arms, presumably to increase tension.